The Samsung Galaxy S20 is easily one of my favorite phones that came out in 2020, and it is still a very powerful device, and it's still one of my favorite phones. And surprisingly, this was actually one of the phones that helped me build my second channel, in 2020, just by basic tutorials on this thing. And I will tell you, the Galaxy S20 in this day and age is still a very important and very powerful phone, and this thing has gone down in value quite a bit. So if you want to pick up this phone and other phones I'd recommend this year, the links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, the body of this thing hasn't aged and it still looks extremely beautiful. The back of this phone definitely doesn't look that great, but the front of this phone is still extremely good. And when I compare this panel against every other Samsung phone that's came out, even compared to the S21 and maybe even the S22, this is a really good panel, and I don't even see how a lot of manufacturers can beat this panel, including Samsung, to be honest. Now, on the front, 6.2-inch dynamic AMOLED display, 120Hz, 1440p. This thing pretty much has it all. And going from the Galaxy S10, this was a pretty big upgrade. Very slim bezels around the whole entire display of this phone. The hole punch display looks great, and I have nothing to complain about at all. It's still a very good looking panel, and even compared to the iPhone 13 Pros or any other, the Galaxy S21s, all these phones, this one definitely looks really good, and I am a huge fan of this device for sure. Now, on the bottom, we have that USB Type-C port, no headphone jack, but we do have that microSD card slot, which is really cool. I love having that ability of just literally just expanding my storage if I want to. Very few Samsung phones nowadays have this feature, but the Galaxy S20 had it, which was amazing and something that I really liked about this phone. Now, another kind of interesting thing about this phone was the back. I had the gray model, and I can definitely tell you it doesn't look that great anymore, but it's okay. I think it gets the job done, and whatever, we can move on from there. This phone had wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which is always really cool. It also had IP certification as well. So when you're feeling this phone in the hand, it still feels like a very premium phone. It doesn't have things that we have nowadays like frosted glass backs and, a better looking back, but if you're just talking about the front, it's still a very good looking front panel for sure. Now let's go and hit on the cameras of this thing, which is another massive advantage. This thing had a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 64 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, and it also had a 10 megapixel wide angle lens on the front. Now you can shoot 4K at 60 on the back and the front of this phone, but you also had 8K videos that you can film on this thing too. So that is another really big advantage for a phone like this. And in my experience, when you have a device like the Samsung Galaxy S20, you're pretty much future-proofed in that standpoint. Whenever I had anything to do with, the performance of this phone or anything like that in terms of the camera, I didn't really have anything to complain about. And in this day and age, it is still a very good performing phone in terms of that. So this phone still has a bunch of features built into the camera as well. You have a ton of features that you can just go on. Portrait mode, night mode, so many different things like that. And even the front camera is still extremely good. The only issue I would even kind of have is that sometimes the UI in the camera is a little glitchy. And the only other issue is that if you're using apps like Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, for some reason these app developers are still not utilizing the full capability of these cameras. So if you're using the stock camera app, it's a good experience. It's a great experience. But if you're using those type of applications like Snapchat and stuff, you're going to have a little bit of a different experience there. So do keep that in mind. But other than that, this camera is still extremely good, and I'm a huge fan of this camera as well. So in terms of the camera, that pretty much covers it up. Now in terms of the software, this is another pretty good highlight of this phone as well. So this device started off with One UI 2. It is getting One UI 4, which I still haven't gotten on my Galaxy S20. It looks like it's going to be ending on One UI 5. So it's going to be getting all the updates on One UI 4. Then it's going to be getting all the updates on One UI 5, which is coming out at the end of next year. So in reality, this phone is probably going to end off somewhere around 2023 to 2024. So you still have a couple of more years of software on this phone, and then it will still get security updates and this and that for a little while after. So interestingly enough, the Galaxy S8 actually just ended up getting a security update as well. So this thing is still here to stay. It's really not going anywhere anytime soon. So that's another pretty big highlight of this device as well. So when it comes down to the Samsung Galaxy S20, I am still a huge fan of this device, and I have very few things to complain about in terms of the software. My only concern is that, yes, it doesn't have stock Android, and that's kind of an annoying thing as well, and I just don't really mind. And I really do mind a little bit, but you can always install a custom launcher and then pretty much move on from there. So if you don't really care about stock Android too much, much, then this phone is really good and it still has a ton of features built in as well. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up there. Now in terms of the performance side of things, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset, an octa-core CPU, the Adreno 650 GPU, and 8 gigs of RAM. There was only one model of this phone, and that phone did have the 8 gig of RAM option. And here's the thing about the performance. Because of that 120Hz panel, and mostly because this phone isn't even that old, this is still a very, very good performing phone. I have so few things to complain about at all, but really my only concern is that I feel like just like any other manufacturer that's came out, Samsung and iOS and Google Pixel, a lot of these phones are going to start moving over and heavily going into their silicon chipsets. So I feel like sooner than later, Samsung is really going to go in and head first in their Exynos chipsets that they've developed. And really, that's the only thing I could see future Samsung's really kind of going through. But right now, when I compare my Galaxy S20 to the S21 or my Galaxy S20 against my iPhone 13s, there are such few differences that I really can't even think of like crazy differences between them. This is still a very good performing phone. For light intensive things, this is going to be, for light tasks, this phone is going to be able to handle everything. You name it. I mean, phone calls, multitasking, having a bunch of apps in the background, this phone is going to be able to handle it. Now, if you're going up and stepping up to something like a, multitasking with heavier intensive games and multitasking with heavier intensive applications, as long as they're supported, this phone is going to be able to handle it. But even if you're going up to heavy intensive gaming and heavier intensive tasks, things like, playing massive games or, video editing and photo editing and those different types of things, this phone is going to be able to handle it. And like I mentioned, for several years now since this phone has came out, it is still a very fast phone and I've still had very few issues with it for sure. So when it comes down to that, I'm going to tell you this is a very solid performing device and I would highly recommend picking it up from a performance standpoint. It's not perfect. There are some times where things glitch up and everything, but I think that has a lot more to do with, One UI rather than, the actual hardware of this phone. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now ending it off with the battery life, this device has that 4000 mAh battery and it is still a very good performing battery for sure. Like I mentioned, I haven't really had too many things to complain about. It has reverse wireless charging, which is really cool. So if you're in a pinch and you need to go and charge up somebody else's device or another one of your devices, well, this thing's going to be able to handle it, which is really beautiful. Now in terms of the battery from day-to-day tasks, this thing is easily going to last a day for me. It may last a day for you too, and I'm pretty sure it will. So in terms of that, this is a very good battery life, and like I mentioned, nothing really to complain about on my side. So in terms of that kind of covers up this whole review. And to be honest, the Samsung Galaxy S20 is still completely worth it in my opinion. It's a very good device for pretty much everything you're going to throw at it. It wasn't perfect when it came out. My only concern really is pretty much the software that it's running, but it's still supported with software and it's still going to be getting software support. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. But the highlights of this thing, it has a beautiful display, still decent battery life, which is still pretty cool, reverse wireless charging, micro SD card slot, great performance, and it's still supported with software. It doesn't really get too much better than this, to be honest. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.